Now what we're going to do is open the jazz tune that we broke down earlier in a different episode, and I'm going to walk you through the steps of moving that from a stereo mix to setting up Atmos, getting the renderer launched, getting the basic setup done, and just kind of walk through some of the how and why this works. And then talk about, even though you won't be able to hear what I'm hearing in the room in Atmos, talk about a few of the concepts that I might implement as I explode this mix into an Atmos mix that will just help you maybe get creative and understand a little bit better how it works. All right, so we're about to break this mix out into an Atmos mix. And one of the things that I personally prefer is to start with the stereo mix. The reason is the artist has already approved this. This album is going to be out soon. People may hear this in stereo before they get a chance to hear it in Atmos. So it's important for me that when I create an Atmos mix, it is completely representative of the stereo mix itself. We want it to be immersive. We want it to wrap around us. But we don't want to really change the mix and make it something that it wasn't, because if you heard anything that I said in the previous tutorial, this is all about the music. And so we need to make sure that the music is the key thing, that it doesn't fall apart as we turn it into this Atmos mix. One exception to the rule of starting with the stereo mix is if a production is being created for Atmos, or if a production is presented that was not created in Atmos, but it's the desire of the producer or artist for its main presentation to be Atmos, then I would not worry about a stereo mix. But for most of the time as of right now, that stereo mix as a base is going to be crucial to our Atmos mix. Okay, so once again, we have Segovia by David Hamilton. It's a jazz fusion with some Latin influences, and I think this is going to be really fun for creativity in Atmos while we retain David's vision as an artist. So there's a lot of tech work that needs to happen up front to switch into Atmos mode. And I could have prepped a little bit of this, but I decided to walk you through so that you know what has to happen. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna jump into Pro Tools, and we are going to change our playback engine. Currently, I'm using Focusrite Thunderbolt, which is the communication to my Focusrite 16 line interface. But we need to change and go to Dolby Audio Bridge. So it's going to close my session. While that's happening, I'll explain a little bit about the Dolby Audio Bridge. The Dolby Audio Bridge is an internal connection that Avid and Dolby have worked out where Pro Tools can send directly to the Atmos renderer. There used to be a process that Pro Tools would talk to a renderer via send and return plugins. It worked, but it was clunky, and this is extremely streamlined. So this switching over to the audio bridge mode is what's going to allow us to be able to send our audio directly into the Atmos renderer. So it's going to tell me that there's a problem with inputs because it's trying to talk to the renderer, and we haven't assigned all of our correct inputs and outputs yet. So I'm going to rearrange my screens. Typically, I use the renderer on its own screen because I like to see it all the time. And so I have Pro Tools on one monitor, the renderer on another. But so that we can, let all of you see better what's going on, I've kind of split the screen and sharing real estate here. So we have our mix. We're going to go into I/O setup. So at this point, we are not set up for any Atmos. This is just my normal I/O setup for when I'm working in stereo. So I'm going to show you the basics. I've created an Atmos setup for myself, but this is what, if you're launching this for the first time, this is the kind of thing you're going to see. So we're going to import I/O settings, and in the Pro Tools default settings, there are these two Dolby Atmos renderer audio bridge. I'm going to choose the stereo version. I still have all my mono subpaths, which you'll see in a minute, but this gives me a little bit more flexibility when I'm working to start with the stereo versus the mono in this case. So it's asking me, do you want to delete unused buses? And sure, because we don't need them taking up space. If you look here on our output window, you will now see that there is a 7.1.2 bed. That is the predefined Dolby Atmos bed, which we will get to what that bed actually means in a minute. But that's our 7.1.2 bed. And underneath that, we have objects 11 and 12 all the way down to 128. These have already been pre-assigned to outputs, and now when we come over to our bus tab, we see now that we have, okay, we've got our beds, we've got our objects, they are all pre-assigned. They all have mono subpaths, which will be important for us. So it's pretty great. It's already set up in this Pro Tools template. You can build your own once you get going that fits your workflow, your creativity, but it's pretty great that Pro Tools has this already integrated. The one thing that we need to do is we need to map these to our renderer. So I'm going to change this window here, and when I click on the bed, it's going to map to inputs 1 through 10. On the Dolby Atmos renderer, which you can see here is highlighted in purple. Any bed is going to be highlighted in purple. You can have multiple beds. Today we're just going to work with one bed. You can have multiple beds, and then each one of these dots here corresponds with our objects. Back over to our I/O setup, we need to make sure that all of our objects are headed to the renderer. So I'm going to select all these, and I'm going to, sorry, I got ahead of myself. I'm going to open all of these. The renderer doesn't officially have stereo object paths, so what we have to do is open these so we see the mono subpaths, and we're going to select, option select the mono subpaths, and now you can see that it is mapping objects 11 and 12 to input 11 and 12 in the Atmos renderer. So we are now talking with the Atmos renderer. And we're going to make sure that we have something happening. Hopefully I've gotten it right here. A very important thing, which, you know, because I'm not paying attention, we didn't route any tracks to the renderer yet. We set up the I/O, but I didn't see. This is what happens when you do things in real time. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to send all of our tracks over to our bed 712. Now when I hit play, oh, we hear music and we see some very hot meters clipping in the renderer. So we're now officially talking. The next thing that I want to do, I'm going to create an aux track, just a mono aux. And I'm going to send this output 130, which I believe I should have set up as my timecode communication. I need to open my inserts. My timecode communication from Pro Tools to the renderer. So in order to record your mix in the renderer, if you have the mastering version, they have to be timecode locked to one another. So this actually outputs SMPTE timecode from Pro Tools into the renderer. So let's see if it's working, and it is. You can see here I have my sync button on, so I don't have local control in the renderer of playback and transport. But when I hit play in Pro Tools, the time code shows up where it should be. So the first thing we want to do when we're looking at the concept of the Atmos mix is, how do we make things wrap around us? How can we be immersive without letting the mix itself fall apart? And in some cases it's very easy to do, and in other cases it takes a lot of that caution, much like I was talking about on the video where we broke down the stereo mix. I had to be careful even in the stereo mix that I didn't let the music fall apart from the energy of tracking day. So we're gonna dive in, and all the time I'm gonna be thinking, okay, have I made the mix more involving, or have I made things come unglued that I don't feel the same way anymore? A few things that I like to do right off the bat is to start spreading the drums a little bit wider than normal stereo, because we can do that in Atmos. So what I'm gonna do, the first thing is I'm going to bypass all of my pan automation that existed in the stereo mix, because otherwise it's going to fight me. So I've disabled pan automation, and most likely I'm going to need to grab the automation lanes of all pan types and delete that data. Let's go down to our overhead tracks right here. Here's overhead left, and we're gonna go to pan, all pan types. And I'm gonna select everything involving panning on the overhead tracks so that we don't have it fight us. This should do the trick, because now we have all of our pan data out of automation. So let's solo up the overheads. So with our overheads here, the typical panning would be front, left, and right. But in this three-dimensional space, I'm able to bring these back into the room. So I want to feel immersed by the drums a little bit more. So I'm going to pull the overheads out, and I'm going to bring them out an equal amount. So the overheads are almost directly at my sides. Not quite, but they're getting out there. So when I add the kick and snare back in, okay, so I'm listening now, and I have not pulled the overhead so far out that the drum kit has come unglued from itself. It's very important, it's one thing. But what I'm thinking I'll probably want to do is to also bring the tom mics out a little bit. So let's go to the toms. And I'm gonna bring them out not quite as far, but almost. Okay. Which feels really cool. So if we look at our renderer for just a minute, we can now see that there's information in the left surround and right surround. Well, that is the overheads and toms now starting to pull back into those speakers. So we're starting to feel something now, but I'd like to get more dramatic. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up our kick and our snare, take them out of this bed layer, and I'm going to put them into object mode, which is gonna allow me to place them in space, and you're gonna be able to see this on this great little diagram here on the renderer. So let's tell Pro Tools that we want the kick to be object 11. The snare top is object 12. Snare bottom is 13. And let's do this. We're gonna take the snare reverb and we're gonna make that objects 15 and 16. Okay. If I solo the kick drum and then I click this bus button, you can see it now has become an object, and as soon as I did that, you see this little green dot with object 11 pulsing away as the kick drum hits. This is what we mean when we're talking about objects. So I'm gonna change the orientation of this three-dimensional space so you can watch what happens when I now move the Pro Tools panner. When I use my front to rear, I'm now moving the kick drum and we're hearing it. Now it's coming all the way from the back of the room. It's coming from behind us. We could put the kick drum right in the middle of your head if you want. I'm gonna press play again here. Also, remember, because this is Atmos, we now have height control. So as I do this, I hear the kick drum launching up over my head into the ceiling. Now, this is not the place that, in our context anyway, I don't think there's any wrong answer, but today we don't want the kick drum in the ceiling. So let's do something a little more exciting that isn't so crazy though. So what I'm doing is I am using the front rear panner and I'm just pulling the kick drum into us just a little bit. And what this does is it starts to allow the kick drum to use multiple speakers, and we kind of get a sense of it being bigger than just an event up in the front. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size. Now this is another beautiful thing about Atmos, is every object has a size parameter. So when I increase the size, you can see the halo growing around the little floating orb in the Atmos renderer, and you also see the box in the Pro Tools screen. You can see the size grow. And what that does, if you look at our meters up on the renderer, when I shrink the size to 0, it's just utilizing the center channel and the left surround and right surround. As I grow the size, all of a sudden it's starting to leak itself into the tops, left top, right top. Okay, this is starting to feel good. So now what I'm doing is I'm using all the speakers to give me just a little bit more of that feeling of the drum. I'm gonna match that because we don't want our kick and snare to come unglued. So I'm gonna match this, and I know I'm at 71 on the front rear, and I'm at 23 on the sides. So let's add our snare in here. We're gonna switch these over to object mode also. And then we're gonna go 71 and 23. And then we're gonna go to the snare bottom. We're gonna move it to 71 and 23. I'm gonna look and see if I got that right, if I got it backwards. Yeah, it looks right. So now what I'm hearing when I solo my drums, I feel like I'm sitting in the middle of a drum kit. It feels very natural. Feels very natural to me, but it is much more involving than just feeling like I'm listening to something coming out of a set of speakers. I feel like I'm there a little bit more. So the last thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the snare reverb. This is where we'll get a little creative. We're gonna take the snare reverb, and I'm actually gonna take the snare reverb that just turned into objects, and I'm going to put it all the way in the back and all the way on the ceiling. Now, it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of reverb coming from behind me, but what it does again is now I actually start to feel like man, I might be in a little club or in a room with this drummer. The feeling that I'm getting right now is entirely different than kind of the observation of a stereo mix. I feel like I'm inside it. Okay, so I think this is a good place to start with our drums. The mix is not falling apart, I don't think. And we're gonna check that in context. But first we're gonna go to our bass guitar and we're gonna look at what we should do to our bass. I'm feeling like we should make him an object 2, and I'm gonna go to object 14, which was unused, turn it into an object. And so I'm gonna do something similar. I'm gonna bring the bass out, but I'm gonna bring the bass a little ahead of the drummer. I'm gonna move him ahead of the drummer. I'm gonna make sure he's centered. Now I'm gonna increase his size, but like a lot. I'm not being shy with this. I think it's cool how integral the bass guitar is in this song. And so it's almost now like we're sitting on a bed of bass, okay? So when I put this back in, I need to make sure that the kick and the bass have not lost their thing together. I love what the bass is doing, but I feel like the kick has come unglued just a little bit, so here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna grab our kick panner, and I'm gonna come halfway between. Yeah, I've just moved the kick closer to the bass because if you remember, our kick is 11, our bass is 14, and now I feel like everything's working. Okay, I'm gonna take us out of solo. Here is the beauty of Atmos. I just unsoloed, and everything except the kick and the bass are still exactly where they were in our stereo mix up in the left, right, and it feels so uninspiring now because they're just living on this single plane up in the front of the room as opposed to moving around. So let's start exploding this some more. The place I'm gonna go first is to the piano, and second is to that solo guitar, because those are kind of the features of this song. Let's go and listen to the piano a little bit here. Now I have to make a decision. Do I leave a particular thing in a bed or do I move it out to an object? Objects can be automated in a really easy way and panned around in real time. You can move things around in a bed, but I'm just trying to think creatively and organizationally, where do I want this to land and what will work best for the listener? And in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and turn the piano into an object again, like I have some of the drums. And so once we've got the piano as an object, we can start to pan it. And for the piano, I want it to be kind of in line with where the bass guitar and the kick drum were, because of the foundation that we need in the rhythm section. So I'm just gonna it feels like it's appropriately in front. Everything is still glued. Nothing's falling apart. Okay, so for now, we're gonna leave the piano here. And when I listen to the piano reverb, I actually love now that the piano reverb is only in the front, left, and right. But I feel the piano just being large and present. So I'm not gonna do anything tricky with the piano reverb for now. I'm gonna leave it where it is. Let's move to the guitar solo. Here we have here's our guitar hook. Now, this is like the vocalist, and it's so cool, and we've got the cool delay and reverb, so I'm gonna be not too shy about experimenting with this, as long as it doesn't fall apart. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the guitar delay and I'm gonna put it as two objects here. And for this, I'm gonna leave them in the front, but I'm gonna put them all the way up on the ceiling. Now what I feel is I feel like the guitar is front and center, and I feel the effects just kind of floating around above my head. They're not disruptive, but it gives me a really, a sense of a heightened space. So we're gonna leave that there, and now I'm gonna grab Chris's guitar, turn that into an object, and I'm gonna leave him panned at the 14 to the right like he was in the stereo mix, because I don't want to lose the general positioning of the band, the way it was glued together. But I'm going to draw him closer to us with the front rear. Okay, I like what this is doing. The other thing I want to do is we have this other guitar track here that does all these great figures. All those figures that the band does. This one, we're definitely going to get a little wild with, and I'm gonna toss this guitar literally all the way up on the ceiling, and I'm gonna put it on top of our head. I started with it all the way on the ceiling, and then I thought, you know what, it'd be kind of cool if I was hearing it a little bit from everywhere. So I brought it down just off the ceiling a little bit so that I now have a sense of it. You can see in our meters here, you can see that we're getting a little bit of it in a lot of places. Okay, so that's feeling really cool to me. I still feel like nothing has collapsed in the mix, but we're not done. The main thing that I'm missing now is I feel like it's thrown off the relationship of the percussion to the rest of the mix, and the perk is so important. So we're gonna dive in and look at the perk a little bit. I will say this, that something I haven't done yet is reach for any EQs or compression or fader moves. Right now, I'm just using the core of the stereo mix to get things going. The way I typically work is I work this way to get creative before I start looking at sonics too much. One of the great things about Atmos is that, if you remember, the solo guitar, for instance, we had to pull some of the low mids out of that to give it a place in the mix, to keep it out of the way of the piano. Well, I find that in Atmos, a lot of times we can go back and look at giving some of that back, because we have so much more physical space to put a mix. We have so much more headroom in which to work the mix that we don't always have to shrink down things via EQ and compression to the same degree. We might choose to do it creatively, But oftentimes we don't have to do it because there's a limited amount of real estate. So I just want to make sure that that you understand that what we're covering right now is just starting to be creative and get an idea of how can we enhance this mix in an immersive environment without inherently changing the mix. With that, let's look at the percussion and see what we can maybe do to make this really come to life in Atmos. And I'm gonna loop this section for now. Okay, multiple shakers, cowbell, conga, timbales, everything. We're gonna have a little fun with this. Now, super crucial that nothing falls apart. I know I keep saying that, but it's so important. So don't get carried away with what you can do. Be asking, should I be doing it? And I'm not talking about playing it safe. I'm talking about making good musical decisions based on honoring the song and honoring your client. Let's start with the relationship between the congas and the timbale. What can I maybe do here? So, I'm gonna create a stereo object for these congas. Okay. What my crazy idea is I'm going to attempt kind of an X pattern with these, where I'm going to take and unlink, because I can't move them. I'm actually going to attempt to get the congas working opposite each other in the front left and rear right, and then I'm going to go over to the timbales. I'm going to create an object for them, and then we're going to take them and do the opposite. So where we had the congas in front, left, rear, right, we are going to put this guy into the rear. I'm gonna go a little wider than what I had in stereo, and then leave this guy up in the front right. So now we should be, if I've got it correct and I didn't get myself backwards. I've got the two things working against each other. This is feeling really cool. And I'm not even sure that it's gonna work yet, but in my mind, it's worth exploring. So last thing I wanna do is I'm kind of digging the idea of putting the conga verb, which we know was this kind of short, it's just a 1 second long room. I'm gonna take this and I'm actually going to put it kind of right in the middle. So I'm gonna try even 50% in the middle here. Yeah, and this really kind of glues the two of them together. So now as you can see, we got all these dots flashing everywhere. Okay, so I'm gonna listen with my drums. Now, honestly, this has been a little bit of a happy accident because it's working really well. But one of the things that I didn't expect is I had forgotten that the side stick played such a great part in this section of the song. Getting the percussiveness of the congas and the timbale kind of out of the way of the side stick a little bit is really letting the side stick on the snare pop better. And I'm feeling this really great motion from all around me, all the while being very solid as far as the groove goes. So again, this shows you kind of one of the really cool things about Atmos is you can move things around in space more that that allow you to hear even deeper into a mix. With that, let's, you know, everybody loves a cowbell. Let's listen to the cowbell here. Now the cowbell comes in sections to just be an accent and kind of give a bump. So again, we're going to go into object mode with him because I think he just is a great contender for sitting right on top of your head. So let's take him all the way up to the top, and we're gonna take him all the way into the middle, and we're gonna see what that sounds like. That's pretty cool. Oh, and I have one, see, this is where you have to watch, you know, this is one of the tricky things when you're going from stereo. I had written some pan automation on the left, and so now it's trying to fight me. And so I'm going to turn off the automation for front position, which I was trying to do globally, and it was arguing with me. So now we've done that, and now I can pan both of these guys up the middle, and it feels pretty sweet. This is starting to turn into something cool, which is always what you want, you know? With that, I had some ideas of getting crazy with the shakers, but what's going on right now feels so good to me, and I have a sense that if I start pulling the shakers apart from each other too much, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 playing in this section and a couple others add in other sections, I don't want that gel of the subdivision of the shakers to fall apart. So I'm gonna hear what that sounds like with leaving them up in the front for now. Okay, I really like this. They play a very important role, and by nature of, you know, how we pulled our drums forward towards us in the room, and we've taken the congas and the timbale and the cowbell and moved them around, now the shakers are living kind of in their own world up there in the front, which is actually working really, really well. They feel glued into the rest of the rhythm section. I feel their energy, I can hear them well, but we didn't get too crazy. I just feel like with all of the shakers and their intricate patterns, because each one is different, that if we start pulling them apart, I feel like that'd be kind of our danger zone of the groove is gonna collapse. I think we need to address the nylon guitars. They do some really cool things. And I think we can add some drama. So let's move them into objects as well. And for these, I think I'd like to just move them beside our head. So I'm gonna put this guy at a 0 position, but I'm gonna leave their left and right panning where they were. Now they're tucked in a little bit, so we're really gonna sense these close to our head, and it could be too much. It could take them out of the context of the band, but let's see what happens. I feel like it's nice for this section. Now, let's... It's working well. Okay, that feels really good to me. The next thing I'm gonna do is, we have not played with any multi-channel reverbs yet. So what I think I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna set up a multi-channel reverb off the B3. So if you remember, we were using the B3 with this natural plate reverb, and that's an Avid Revibe reverb. Now, Revibe can do up to 5.1, but I have some reverbs that actually go all the way up to a full Atmos situation. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually leave the B3 where it is in the front, but I'm going to add a send. So I'm gonna say a new track, and we can just make a mono aux, and I'm gonna call this B3 AT for Atmos. I'm gonna solo that right now. It's in the 712 bed. It automatically took it there, and I'm gonna go over to Liquid Sonics. I'm gonna grab a Cinematic Rooms 7.1.2 reverb, and it's going to tell me that outputs will be removed, which is fine because it was routed to the 7.1.2 outputs, and we need to route it to the bed. So let's see what we have here. Now, a hall reverb is not the right thing for this, but it's working, it's going everywhere. So I'm going to just write this aux send for the time being. And I think we're gonna go with more of a room space because I want it to be kind of tight. And I'm wondering if a tiled room is nice, but I actually want even tighter. And I don't think I want dark though. So what we might do is to try to do a close room. That's kind of cool. I feel like I'm inside a B3, which is somewhere I'd never want to actually be because it would be miserable, but this is fun. So I'm gonna raise the level of the reverb return a little. It glues. So far we have panned things within the bed, we've turned things into objects and moved them into the room, but another way that we can spread things around is, in this case, we left the B3 in the front of the mix like it was in the stereo mix, but I used this reverb to send it around. Now, there are so many creative ways to do this. You might be saying, well, I don't have that, 7.1 reverb. What am I supposed to do? Well, I'm doing this to show you real quickly, but oftentimes what I will tend to do is use multiple reverbs or multiple delays that I set up so that the space changes, evolves, and gets interesting. I might have a reverb in the front, a reverb in the rear, and some delays that dance in the middle over our heads, or delays that move back that feed reverbs. So you can actually have a dynamic space to work with. Those are things that just take time to set up, but that's where you start getting very creative and say the sky's the limit. I'm honestly pretty happy with this as far as the bones of the mix goes. I can kind of envision maybe playing with a couple of the pads and the pluck synth and getting creative with those. Maybe even some light auto panning and putting them up high. Every step of the way though, I'll be asking the same question. Is my mix falling apart? Is it cool, but it doesn't feel right? And I think that that's an important thing to continue to remember. I want to stop for a minute and talk about a couple of technical things. So if you look at the renderer screen and I play back, I'm going to dim this so we don't hear it too much. So you can see over here we have some level meters. Dolby has specified a reference level of -18 LUFS. Right now our mix is at about -9. It's not that it's too hot for the format, but there are a lot of reasons why making sure that target references get hit, it's very valuable. So at this point, my gain staging is not completely correct for where I want my Atmos mix to target. A lot of times what I will do is I will actually create master faders. I'll create a master fader for the bed, and then I'll create master faders for my objects. Once I have those all assigned, I can then link them together and pull everything down, and I could pull everything down about 9 dB, and we'd be right there in the sweet spot. If I'm starting a mix from the get-go that's going to be Atmos, I would be creating my gain stage from the first minute. But because I'm taking an existing stereo mix, I actually choose to get a little bit of the creative going first and then adjust my gain staging later. Something else that we didn't talk about, for any of you who watched the stereo deconstruction version, my 2-mix processing was pretty important on this mix. What happens when we go into Atmos? You can't have a full mix chain assigned to every object. The computer wouldn't be able to handle that. The time it would take to set that up would not work. So there are a few ways that I handle that. Often I will create a 712 bus, a 712 master fader rather, that is assigned to the 712 bed. And I will use my whole plugin chain and move that over to have a 7.1.2 master plugin chain, which would then create the same tone for the bed that I had in my stereo mix. The problem comes when the minute I remove a source from the bed and turn it into an object, it's no longer going through that master fader. It's kind of existing as its own source. So I will lose the tonality of the 2-mix. I will lose any level changes of the 2-mix. So each mix I do, I have to decide which way I want to compromise. Do I start the mix and just do the mix without 2-bus processing and then go back and make tweaks within the mix if I need to lift the top a little bit on everything? Okay, there are ways I can do that. For this particular mix, because of the way it's spreading out, I really feel like it's kind of playing out well enough that it didn't collapse by removing the 2-mix processing. I will probably play with creating those buses and see if I like it better or not, which workflow is better. But that all becomes part of that process I talked about, where I may readdress some of the EQ and dynamics of the individual channels based on having more space to work now. Just be aware that the stereo processing will not apply to Atmos unless you start creating multiple buses and multiple master faders for buses and objects. But I really think that we've begun something super creative here. We've just scratched the surface on creating an Atmos mix. I hope that you can see kind of the technical bones of how we move from a Pro Tools stereo mix into an Atmos mix, a few of the decision-making processes, and some of the possibilities. Atmos is a very deep endeavor. You can tell that what I've done is creative and basic, but it can go so far beyond what we've just scratched in, 45 minutes or so. We could spend days kind of doing a deep dive on this, and maybe we will sometime. But for today, what I want to do is I want to talk about what has to happen when the mix is done to be able to deliver this mix? What happens? So this is also a complex topic. I'm going to hit us with some basic points. When you print a Dolby Atmos mix, it actually prints the 712 bed, and it prints all 128 channels. So unlike a stereo mix that's just left and right, when you print an Atmos mix, it is printing 128 channels all at the same time. A stereo mix would typically be, 30 or 40 megabytes, and an Atmos mix will often be 3 or 4 gigabytes because we've got all of these channels that need to print so that each of their information gets retained. Every object has its own print track. The bed has its own print track. A few of the ins and outs of this is that in order to print a final mix, you need to have the Dolby Atmos mastering suite software, which is what I have. You can buy, I think it's called the production suite, which is lower cost. It doesn't have the speaker EQ potential in it, and you can't print your mix as a final Dolby master. With the production suite, you can print the master and send it to someone like me who has the mastering suite to put it in a deliverable format, because I can open an Atmos mix and convert it to that deliverable format. As far as mastering goes, there are mastering engineers who are mastering Atmos music. Some of the music out there is not mastered, which both of those things combined are, in my opinion, a very important reason to use the -18 spec that Dolby has laid out, because it helps to level the playing field on playback levels a little bit if your mix doesn't go to mastering. Once a mix is mastered and output, where does it go from there? Well, if it's being distributed through a label, they are going to send it to Tidal or Amazon Music HD through their channels that are set up to take it all the way through the process of getting uploaded properly to Tidal and Amazon Music HD. Well, what about for indie artists? I have several indie artists who have mixes up on Tidal now that we've done, and the way that they are doing it is through Avid Play. If you go to Avid's website, there's Avid Play, and they have a way where you can upload your Atmos mix through Avid Play, and it will go onto those platforms. So the great news is there is a distribution ability for even the at-home indie artist. You don't have to be on a label to get your music in Atmos up on Tidal and Amazon Music HD. You just have to be able to send it to someone. If you don't have the mastering suite, you have to send it to someone to be able to export that proper file, which is basically a container that holds all of the information that Tidal needs to be able to play into your system and have it decode properly. That's a basic flyover of the end part of the process. Again, there's a lot of technical that goes into it, but I think that, kind of lets you know it's possible for even the indie artist, and the equipment needs are simply, it's got to hit somebody with the mastering software before it can be distributed. I'm Rob Burrell, and I'm so glad that you were able to join me today for a quick dive, bird's eye view of Atmos mixing. I'm so excited about this format. I think everybody's going to latch onto it quickly, and I hope you get to experience it both from a consumer and a creative standpoint soon. You can find me at my website, robburrellmix.com, or at themixmentor.com, and we'll make sure to put links to more information about Dolby Atmos mixing on the Dolby website, where you can watch some videos, read the manual for the renderer, try to continue to wrap your head around it and see if it's something that you want to get involved with. So thanks again.